What's going on out there, guys? Andrew here back at you with another one. And not too long ago, me and my friend Brandon Smith over at Macho Movie Madness went and watched The Iron Claw. And me being a lifelong world class and Von Erich fan, I was so ready for this movie, ever since that trailer dropped for it. Ever since I actually saw Zac Efron, well over a year ago, all bulked up with the Kevin Von Erich hair. So I was really excited for this one. And it's an A24 movie, and say what you will about A24. I did go into it with a little bit of trepidation, but I also thought, man, this is the Von Erich story. So much tragedy. How are they going to mess this up? But I'll go ahead and tell you, this movie was amazing. I thought they did the story, that Von Erich tragedy, so much justice with this movie. Getting into it, I thought, even though Zac Efron was Kevin, he's built just a little bit more like Carrie, and when you pair him with Jeremy Allen White's Carrie, they were a little bit out of place. There are a few negatives. I guess I'll go ahead and get into those. Of course, there was no Chris. That character was kind of taken into the Mike character, I guess, to kind of save everybody even more grief. I guess your average moviegoer they wouldn't think would be able to take that much grief in a movie, which is just a testament to the actual Kevin Von Erich, with everything he's withstood over his lifetime. And of course, Ric Flair. Anytime you go to one of these reviews, everybody says the Ric Flair was awful. He was awful in this movie. As me and Brandon said in our review over on Macho, they would have been better off taking Jay Lethal and letting him be Ric Flair. Woo! He does those so much better than him. The guy looked nothing like Rick. Bless his heart, he tried. But yeah, as far as negatives, that's about the only negatives I had with this movie. Other than maybe, there were some things like it showed the brothers and their camaraderie, floating down a river and going to parties and stuff. And in the 80s, when they were wrestling, like 6 days a week and sometimes double shots, they wouldn't have had the time to do that. But also, I understand that by doing that, you told the story better, so I can forgive that. But as far as things I liked about this movie, I felt like they encapsulated the early 80s just perfectly, man. That scene where they go to the Sportatorium on a Friday night, and, it's that camera shot going through the crowd. I felt like I was at a tailgate in 1982 in Dallas, Texas, man. I felt like I was actually in the movie. And I loved that scene. That was one of my favorite scenes of the movie. All the scenes inside the Sportatorium, with the one light over the top, I thought those looked great. For the most part, I thought the Von Erichs looked pretty good, and the wrestling looked pretty good. Chavo Guerrero is in the movie as the Sheik, and he actually trained these guys up. But I did think it felt very much like the early 80s, and I loved most of the guys who played the brothers in this movie. Or Zac Efron was amazing, and I'll get more into that toward the end of this review. The guy who played David, I thought was the most like the actual Von Erich brother. He's taller, he was the better talker of the two, and they really drove that point home, how he was going to be the first to really become world heavyweight champion before that was taken from him tragically. And, the character of Mike, I liked. I actually thought the actual, once he has his issues with the toxic shock and it kind of fried his brain, if you go and watch the actual interviews with Mike Von Erich, they're actually scarier than what's in the actual movie. I mean, that poor man. But anyway, the only one I really had a problem with was Jeremy Allen White's Carrie, just because he was so small. He looked like one of the Simpson brothers, more like one of them if you followed World Class. But because that actor was so good in that role, I can forgive that. The character that got to play Fritz, I thought was just great. It could have been a little more gravelly, like Fritz, who was chain smoking 2 cigarettes at the same time in real life. But I thought he delivered everything pretty well. The other wrestler I thought that they perfectly encapsulated in this movie was the late great Harley Race. Man, that actor was just spot on. The way he talked, the way he looked, just straight up Harley Race, who I've met, a couple times before he passed a few years ago. We live in the same state. But man, how are you going to get Harley Race so right and Ric Flair just so wrong? That's polarizing to me. I really did like what they did with the story. Yeah, there were some things like Kevin actually got married in, I believe it was like 80, and they made it look like he got married in 84 before David went to Japan. And then, of course, they make it look like when Kerry won the belt in 84, he had his foot amputated. like that very next day. And that's of course was 2 years later, so that's not exactly what happened. But I understand you have to progress the story, so I'm not going to hold a grudge against the movie for that. I think they did a good job overall, telling the story of the brothers as best they could without without it getting even more sad. If there was anything else I would like to have saw in the movie, maybe just another scene or two with the Freebirds, maybe slamming the door in Carrie's head, just showing what it did to that family business, raising it up, because that's what made them superstars. That, or the dynamic duo, them, Chris and Gino. Chris Adams isn't even in the movie. Gino Hernandez is just real briefly in one scene, but they were a big part. In 1985, that big hair match they had with Kevin and Carrie. I would like to have seen something about that. Maybe a montage of just Von Erich moments. I felt like maybe they missed out just a little bit on that. But other than that, and some of the other things that I'd said at the beginning of the review, man, I thought this movie was great. And when this movie comes out on streaming, I can't recommend it enough. I think it might still be at some theaters at this point when this comes out. I just read that it just went over $20 million grossed, which is awesome when you think about, say A24, an independent movie. And I actually had to drive, me and Brandon actually had to drive like an hour and 5 minutes to a theater, way down this windy road to see it, because it wasn't playing anywhere close to us. So yeah, the fact that it's made 20 million in the box office, that's amazing to me. And I love the fact that the Von Erichs maybe just now are getting their due, because you're talking 40 years past the fact. A lot of those people who are fans are in their 60s plus or have passed on, and so I feel like their story's kind of forgotten. And so I'm glad that they're getting their due now, and I hope that this shows everybody that some of those like Dark Side of the Rings that Vice does, some of those would be some great stories to make into wrestling movies. And hopefully we get to see that. And I'm glad to see World Class on the forefront. And one other thing that kind of makes me sad and maybe just a little bit frustrated is that this movie came out, and you go to Peacock and go to the WWE Network, and there was nothing about World Class. I would have at least put them on the WWE page right there on the front so people can rediscover it. I'm actually going back. I hadn't watched any World Class in probably 8 months, and so I'm actually going back to 1983 when it got really, really hot, through 85. And that was another thing too. Once Mike throws that drop kick, breaks his shoulder, which actually happened to Chris, as far as breaking his arm on a drop kick. They actually showed the Sportatorium, and there was nobody past the first 2 rows, which is very time accurate. You look at the latter half of 1986 into 1987, and the Sportatorium's empty, just because the economy had tanked and people were just kind of tired, kind of over the tragedy by that point. But overall, man, this was one of my favorite movies of the year. Me and Brandon over on Macho are going to put that ranking out here soon, so be looking for that. But yeah, it's up there. I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10. I think it is amazing, and you definitely need to check it out. So guys, thank you for watching this video. If you'd like me to cover more wrestling movies, like, I don't know, maybe Body Slam or The Wrestler, let me know down in the comments. I like all those movies. So if you like what you see, guys, be sure to like and subscribe. As always, I'm Andrew, and I'll see you down the line.